What happens when a legendary British actor with decades of experience comes face to face with a talk show host who pushes one question too far? It only took 23 seconds for a light-hearted chat to transform into one of the most shocking confrontations in British television history. Before we dive into this absolute chaos, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations the industry doesn't want you to see, and the drama that happens when civility breaks down and tempers explode on live television. Last night on the Graham Norton show, Michael Caine sat down on that famous red couch for what everyone expected would be a delightful conversation, filled with charming anecdotes and witty banter. Instead, what unfolded was a clash that left the entire studio audience in stunned silence and ended with the legendary actor walking off the set in absolute fury. From the moment Michael walked onto the set, something felt slightly off, though it would take time for that feeling to manifest into actual conflict. The audience gave him a standing ovation, genuinely thrilled to see one of Britain's most beloved actors gracing the famous red couch. Michael smiled and waved graciously, that distinctive charm that has made him a star for over 6 decades on full display. He took his seat alongside the other guests for the evening, a popular comedian and a rising young actress, both of whom seemed genuinely honored to be sharing the couch with a living legend. Graham welcomed him warmly, as he always does, with that characteristic Irish charm and playful energy that has made him one of the most successful talk show hosts in the world. "Michael Caine, everyone," Graham announced with genuine enthusiasm. "It's so wonderful to have you here. You look fantastic, as always." "Thank you, Graham," Michael replied, with that iconic voice that's been imitated by comedians for decades. "It's lovely to be here. Though I have to say, this couch is a bit more slippery than I remember from last time." The audience laughed, and Graham grinned. "Yes, well, we've had a few drinks spilled on it over the years. It's seen some things, this couch." The conversation started pleasantly enough, flowing naturally from topic to topic. Graham asked Michael about his latest project, a new film he'd been working on with an acclaimed director known for making thoughtful, character-driven dramas. Michael answered enthusiastically, his face lighting up as he talked about the experience. He shared funny stories from the set, like the time they had to stop filming because a flock of geese invaded the location and wouldn't leave. He talked about his co-stars with genuine affection, praising their talent and professionalism. He displayed the kind of natural charisma and storytelling ability that has made him such a compelling presence, both on screen and in interviews. The audience laughed at all the right moments, hanging on his every word. The other guests on the couch chimed in with their own comments and questions, genuinely engaged with Michael's stories. Everything seemed to be going exactly as planned, exactly as it should for a Graham Norton show appearance. This was supposed to be fun, light, entertaining. Graham then moved on to discussing Michael's incredible career, spanning over 6 decades in cinema, his journey from working-class South London to becoming one of the most recognizable voices and faces in cinema history. Michael spoke warmly about his early days, struggling to make it as an actor in a profession that wasn't particularly welcoming to people from his background. He talked about the rejection he faced, the countless auditions where he was told his accent was wrong, that he didn't have the right look, that he should consider another line of work. He talked about the small roles he took just to pay the bills, the years of perseverance before anyone took him seriously. He talked about the moment he got his breakthrough role in Zulu, how it changed his life overnight, how suddenly doors that had been closed were opening. The conversation was warm, nostalgic, and genuinely engaging. The audience was loving it. But then Graham brought up a topic that immediately changed the atmosphere in the studio. He started talking about Michael's comments in a recent interview about the state of modern cinema, and particularly about method acting. Michael had expressed some strong, unfiltered opinions about young actors who take method acting to what he considered absurd extremes, staying in character between takes, demanding that crew members address them by their character names, essentially making everyone around them uncomfortable in the name of art. Graham wanted to explore that further, and you could see in his expression that he thought this would be good television. A bit of controversy to spice things up. So Michael, you've been quite vocal recently about your feelings on method acting, Graham said, with that mischievous glint in his eye that regular viewers know well, the one that suggests he knows he's entering potentially controversial territory but is going to do it anyway. You said that staying in character between takes is complete nonsense. That got quite a reaction online, as you can imagine. People had opinions. Michael shifted slightly in his seat, his expression becoming noticeably more serious, the pleasant smile fading somewhat. Well, yes, I did say that in an interview, and I stand by it completely. This idea that you need to torture yourself and everyone around you to give a good performance is ridiculous. It's self-indulgent nonsense. I've worked with the greatest actors in the world, Sean Connery, Laurence Olivier, Maggie Smith, and none of them needed to make everyone's life miserable to do great work. But don't you think? Graham pressed forward, leaning in slightly with that interviewer's instinct for a potentially interesting angle, that for some actors, that level of immersion, that complete dedication to staying in the mindset of the character, helps them find nuances they might otherwise miss? That it's a valid approach to the craft, even if it's not your personal preference or the way you were trained? Valid? Michael's tone sharpened noticeably, and you could see his shoulders tense. Graham, there's nothing valid about making your fellow actors uncomfortable or treating the crew like they don't exist because you're in character. That's not dedication to your craft. That's self-indulgence dressed up as art. That's someone who thinks the world revolves around them and their process. The audience laughed nervously, sensing that this was becoming more than just friendly debate. The other guests on the couch exchanged glances, unsure whether this was still playful banter or something more serious. Graham, however, seemed energized by Michael's strong response, and decided to push further, perhaps not realizing where this was heading. I suppose what I'm asking is whether your criticism of modern method acting comes from a generational perspective, Graham said, his tone still light but with an unmistakable edge to it now. Whether perhaps the newer generation of actors approaches their craft differently than your generation did, and maybe that's not necessarily wrong or self-indulgent, just different. Times change, approaches change. Michael's jaw tightened visibly, and you could see the muscles in his face working. Are you suggesting I'm out of touch, Graham? Is that what you're getting at here? That I'm some old dinosaur who doesn't understand modern acting? No, not at all, Graham said quickly, though his expression and body language suggested he was exactly getting at that. I'm just saying that cinema has evolved over the decades. Acting techniques have evolved, training has changed, and what might have worked in the 60s and 70s might not be the only way to approach things now. There's room for different methods. What worked in the 60s and 70s? Michael repeated, his voice rising slightly, genuine indignation creeping in. Graham, those decades produced some of the greatest performances in cinema history. Marlon Brando in The Godfather, Peter O'Toole in Lawrence of Arabia, Albert Finney in Tom Jones. These were towering performances, and they didn't need to stay in character off-set. They turned up, did brilliant work, and then went home to their families like normal, professional human beings. Well, Brando was actually known for his method approach, Graham pointed out. Perhaps unwisely. He was quite famous for it, in fact. Brando was a genius who knew when to turn it on and when to turn it off. Michael shot back firmly. He didn't make life hell for everyone around him. There's a difference between preparation and performance, and making everyone around you suffer for your art. Graham leaned forward, clearly not ready to let this go, committed now to this line of questioning, perhaps more out of stubbornness than actual curiosity. But Michael, isn't there something a bit, dismissive about completely writing off an entire approach to acting, an entire methodology that's taught in drama schools around the world, just because it's not how you personally do things? Some of the most acclaimed, award-winning performances of recent years have come from actors who use that exact method you're criticizing. Dismissive? Michael's face was flushing now, color rising in his cheeks, his legendary composure starting to crack in a way rarely seen. I'm not being dismissive, Graham. I'm being honest about what I've observed in this industry for 60 years. And what I've seen, what I know from experience, is that the best actors, the truly great ones, don't need gimmicks. They don't need to torture themselves or anyone else. They just need talent, preparation, dedication, and professionalism. That's it. But surely you can acknowledge that different approaches work for different people, Graham persisted, and you could see some of the other guests on the couch becoming visibly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was heading, shifting in their seats, looking at each other uncertainly. What you call gimmicks, others might call commitment. What you see as unprofessional behavior, others might see as total dedication to the craft. Commitment? Michael laughed, but there was absolutely no humor in the sound. It was harsh and cutting. You want to know what real commitment is, Graham? Real commitment is learning your bloody lines. Real commitment is hitting your marks. Real commitment is making it look effortless when you know it's anything but. Real commitment is respecting your fellow actors and the crew who are working just as hard as you are. It's not pretending you're someone else in the lunch queue or refusing to break character when a crew member asks you a simple question. The audience was completely silent now, holding their breath, collectively sensing that something had gone very wrong with what was supposed to be a fun evening. This had clearly moved beyond friendly debate, beyond the playful sparring that the Graham Norton show is known for, into something more heated and genuinely personal. Graham, however, seemed determined to continue, perhaps unable or unwilling to recognize that he'd pushed too far. I think what's interesting here, what's really fascinating, Graham observed, leaning back in his chair with a slight smirk that many in the audience would later say seemed deliberately provocative, is that you seem quite angry about this whole topic. It's just acting at the end of the day, isn't it? Just different people approaching the same job in different ways. Why does it bother you so much, so viscerally, how other people choose to approach their work? What's really going on here? Why does it bother me? Michael's voice rose significantly, and several people in the audience visibly flinched at the volume and intensity. It bothers me because I care about this profession more than I can possibly express. I care about maintaining standards, about professionalism, about treating people with respect. And I don't like seeing entitled young actors thinking they're owed special treatment, thinking they're justified in making everyone around them miserable for 3 months of filming, all because they've convinced themselves it's necessary for their art. It's narcissism, plain and simple. Entitled? Graham seized on the word like a dog with a bone, his eyes lighting up. That's quite a strong characterization, quite harsh. Are you saying the younger generation of actors as a whole is entitled? That seems like a pretty sweeping generalization. I'm saying some of them, far too many of them, could benefit from learning their craft properly, from understanding the history of acting, instead of hiding behind method acting as an excuse for unprofessional and sometimes abusive behavior, Michael said sharply, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Graham sat back with a knowing smile, one that seemed calculated to infuriate Michael even more. You know, some people watching this might say that sounds like someone from an older generation being a bit bitter about not being relevant anymore, about the industry moving on without them. Just saying. The words hung in the air like a bomb that had just been dropped. You could hear several loud gasps from the audience, genuine shock at what Graham had just said. The other guests on the couch looked absolutely horrified, their faces frozen in expressions of disbelief. And Michael's expression transformed from irritated to genuinely, deeply furious in an instant, his face going from flushed to almost pale with rage. What did you just say to me? Michael's voice was dangerously quiet now, barely above a whisper, which somehow felt infinitely more intense than any amount of shouting could be. The quiet rage was palpable, filling the entire studio. Graham seemed to finally realize he might have gone too far, that he'd crossed a line that shouldn't have been crossed. But instead of backing down gracefully or apologizing, he tried to laugh it off, which made everything worse. "Oh, come on, Michael. I'm just having a bit of fun here. You know how this show works. We have banter, we tease each other. It's all in good spirits." "Having a bit of fun?" Michael repeated slowly, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "You just suggested, on national television, to millions of viewers, that I'm bitter and irrelevant. That's your idea of fun? That's what you call good-spirited banter?" "I think you're being a bit sensitive about this," Graham said, which was possibly the absolute worst thing he could have said in that moment, adding fuel to an extra's already raging fire. "I was just making a light observation about how different generations view things differently. It wasn't meant as a serious insult." "Sensitive?" Michael stood up from the couch abruptly, the movement so sudden and forceful that his microphone pack nearly fell off, startling everyone in the studio, including the camera operators. "You insult me, question my relevance, dismiss my entire career and perspective, and then you have the audacity to tell me I'm being sensitive? Who the hell do you think you are, Graham?" The audience was completely frozen now. Not a sound from any of them. No one knew what to do, how to react. The cameras kept rolling, operators following Michael's every move, capturing every moment of this complete breakdown of what was supposed to be a fun, light-hearted chat show appearance. Graham's smile had finally faded completely, replaced by a look of genuine uncertainty and perhaps the first stirrings of regret. "Michael, please sit down," Graham said, his tone now more conciliatory, trying to regain control of the situation. "Let's talk about this like adults. I didn't mean to offend you. That genuinely wasn't my intention here." "You didn't mean to?" Michael's laugh was harsh and bitter, devoid of any actual amusement. "You called me bitter and irrelevant. How exactly am I supposed to take that, Graham? As a compliment? As friendly banter? Please, enlighten me." "I think you're misinterpreting what I said," Graham tried to explain, but Michael wasn't having any of it. "I'm not misinterpreting anything," Michael said firmly. "You've been needling me this entire conversation, trying to get a reaction, trying to create drama for your show. Well, congratulations, you got what you wanted." One of the other guests tried to intervene, suggesting they all take a breath and reset the conversation. But Michael was already reaching for his microphone, pulling it off with jerky, angry movements. "Michael, come on," Graham said, standing up now as well. "This is silly. Let's just sit back down and move on to something else. We've got a great show lined up." "Silly?" Michael turned to face Graham directly. "You publicly insult me and you think it's silly that I'm upset about it? You've got some nerve, Graham. I came here as a favor and this is how you treat me? As a favor?" Graham's tone changed slightly, becoming more defensive. "Michael, you came here to promote your film. That's why any guest comes on this show. And you used that as an excuse to humiliate me," Michael shot back. "To suggest that I'm some washed-up old man who's jealous of younger actors. That's what you did, whether you want to admit it or not." "I never said you were washed up," Graham protested. But his voice lacked conviction. "You implied it," Michael said coldly. "And in this business, implications are everything. You know that as well as I do." The tension in the studio had reached an unbearable level. The producers were surely panicking backstage. The other guests sat frozen on the couch, not knowing where to look. And the audience watched, in horrified fascination, as one of Britain's most beloved actors had a complete falling out with one of Britain's most popular talk show hosts. "Look, I apologize if you feel I implied anything negative," Graham said, though the apology sounded hollow. "That genuinely wasn't my intention. I was trying to have an interesting conversation about different perspectives on acting." "By calling me bitter and irrelevant?" Michael's voice rose again. "That's your idea of an interesting conversation? Graham, I've been doing this for 60 years. I've worked with Hitchcock, with John Huston, with Christopher Nolan. I've won Academy Awards. And you think you can sit there and suggest I don't know what I'm talking about? I never said you don't know what you're talking about, Graham insisted. But Michael cut him off. You didn't have to say it explicitly, Michael said. The implication was clear. You think my views on acting are outdated. You think I'm stuck in the past. You think I'm bitter about the success of younger actors. You managed to communicate all of that without saying any of it directly. You're putting words in my mouth now, Graham said, starting to sound frustrated himself. I asked you about generational differences in approach to acting. That's a legitimate topic of conversation. Not the way you framed it, Michael argued. You made it about me being old and out of touch. You made it personal. Graham ran his hand through his hair, clearly stressed. Michael, I interview hundreds of people on this show. Sometimes, conversations go in unexpected directions. Sometimes, I push a bit to keep things interesting. That's my job. Your job is to make your guests feel comfortable and have fun, Michael said sharply. Your job is not to insult them to get ratings. I didn't insult you, Graham said, though he was clearly lying. To himself as much as to Michael. Yes, you did, Michael stated firmly. And what's worse is that you don't even have the decency to own it. You're standing there trying to gaslight me into thinking I misunderstood you. I didn't misunderstand anything, Graham. I understood you perfectly. The other guests had given up trying to intervene. They sat in uncomfortable silence, probably regretting agreeing to be on the show that night. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent, or what the appropriate response was to witnessing such an unprecedented breakdown. What do you want me to say, Michael? Graham asked, spreading his hands in a gesture of helplessness. What would make this okay? Nothing, Michael said quietly. Nothing you say now is going to make this okay. The damage is done. You've said what you said, and it's out there now. So what, you're just going to leave? Graham asked, and there was an edge of challenge in his voice. You're going to walk off my show because you didn't like the direction of one conversation? I'm leaving because I have too much respect for myself to sit here and be insulted, Michael said with dignity. I'm leaving because I'm too old to play these games. And I'm leaving because, frankly, Graham, I expected better from you. That last comment seemed to hit Graham hard. You could see it in his face. The way his expression shifted from defensive to something that looked almost like shame. But he didn't apologize. He didn't try to stop Michael. He just stood there. This is ridiculous, Graham muttered, but loud enough for the microphones to pick up. You're being incredibly oversensitive about this whole thing. Oversensitive, Michael repeated, shaking his head in disbelief. You're still doing it. Even now. You can't help yourself. You have to have the last word. Have to make it seem like I'm the problem here. Well, you are the one walking off the show, Graham pointed out, which was perhaps the worst possible thing he could have said. Because you made it impossible for me to stay, Michael said, his voice shaking with emotion now. You created a hostile environment. You insulted me, and now you're trying to make it seem like I'm being unreasonable for having a normal human reaction to being disrespected. I think you're being dramatic, Graham said, and several audience members actually gasped at his continued inability to read the room. Dramatic? Michael laughed bitterly. I'm an actor, Graham. Of course I'm dramatic, but this isn't a performance. This is genuine hurt and anger at being treated poorly by someone I thought was a professional. I am a professional, Graham protested. I've been doing this show for years. Then act like it, Michael said sharply. Stop trying to score points. Stop trying to make me look bad. Just let me leave with whatever dignity I have left. Graham opened his mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. He stepped aside, giving Michael a clear path to the exit. Michael didn't look back. He walked straight toward the backstage area, his posture rigid with anger and wounded pride. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Caine, Graham said to the audience, his tone trying for lighthearted but missing by a mile. A few people clapped uncertainly, but most just sat in shocked silence. Michael paused at the edge of the stage, his hand on the curtain. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around and say something else. But instead, he simply shook his head and disappeared through the curtain, leaving behind one of the most uncomfortable moments in talk show history. The cameras captured Graham standing there awkwardly, the other guests looking mortified, and an audience that had just witnessed something they would never forget. What should have been a delightful evening of entertainment had turned into a masterclass in how a conversation can go completely wrong when egos clash and respect is abandoned. This was live television at its most raw and uncomfortable. A genuine moment of conflict between two titans of British entertainment that no amount of planning or scripting could have created or prevented.